some time for questions. We would only ask that you repeat the question so other folks can hear it.
Absolutely.
And if I could ask the first one.
Okay.
So one way of looking at this presentation, I think you've done a brilliant job of outlining the challenges that we have before us. And in many of the sections, you've talked about ways in which libraries can still be relevant, important, and functioning even in the place, even with DRM and some of these things in place. But I'm wondering, going back to that original point about if we propose a strategy of working around problems as opposed to directly confronting and seeking to change those problems, isn't there a strong advocacy role for librarians as opposed to a strong adaptive role for librarians?
I will repeat the question. I'm glad that you summed it up so nicely at the end because I wouldn't have remembered it. Is there a role for libraries to have a more, less of an, not just an adaptive role, but a more of an advocational role? So how do we confront, how can we be a bit more of an oppositional force of DRM? Sure. I'm not sure. I really don't. So I think part of it is just to have a conversation about DRM. I think one of the challenges with my colleagues and my peers is that we're reasonable people. We understand that artists need to make a living. We understand that publishers need to make a living. We're very accommodating. We understand, we don't want to necessarily work in an environment where we're working in sort of oppositional forces. We have the same goals. We want a strong reading public. So the role of being the person saying, no DRM, free books or die, is not a comfortable position for us. And effectively, I don't think that's always it works in some cases. I think it's some cases, but not for myself. I'm more of highlight the good. So there are publishers that don't use DRM. And so what I think we need to do is maybe financially reward, but I think we do have to be oppositional, maybe not necessarily verbally, but clearly with our dollars. If we can't preserve content, especially in an academic setting, if we say, listen, we're going to buy these books and we're going to pulp them in 2 years, publishers are going to take them back in 2 years. You're just renting these books. If that was a physical thing, we wouldn't accommodate it. So I would suggest that we try to make a stronger stand in where we invest our dollars, and then behind the scenes, maybe take our publishers to task. I don't have a lot of conversation with publishers. Yes.
A radical concept from Eli Nyberger is that ebooks are kind of waning, they're kind of on the way out. How do we think ahead to the next? So let's not fight this fight. Okay, we kind of lost this fight. Where do we fight the next fight? Where do we fight for access for the next fight? How do we even proceed with that?
So the question is, in the context of the possibility that ebooks are waning and it's not a fight worth fighting, we should be fighting the next fight. What should we do? And I think the next fight might be this sort of app versus the open web, where the challenge, all those sort of same sort of problems with DRM, if you have a website, things are readily available, and then some stuff is available for purchase. But if you have all of a sudden, if you turn it into an app, then it's really dependent on whether you have a smartphone, it's dependent on whether you have a data plan, it's dependent on whether you have an iPhone versus an Android phone versus a BlackBerry. So I think that what we can do is the radical idea would be to embrace plain text, the plain text revolution. I think if we make sure that everything that we do can be, every PDF we generate, every report we write, every email we write, if that is the one sort of thing we could say is like, everything we should do should always be available as simple plain text, maybe markdown. We could do a remarkable amount of reworking.
So PDF, but make them PDFAs as opposed to PDFs.
And plain text. Just stick in a little plain text file afterwards. that's a whole other talk of the, is it the PDF, are PDFs compatible with like libraries? You take 5 lines of text and you put it into a PDF graphic and all of a sudden it's like a meg.
Yeah.
Oh.
I just wanted to toss out, similar to the NaNoWriMo, the teens in our library are doing Inktober, where it's a challenge. No. It's like 31 drawings for each day.
Oh, that's excellent.
And then you tag it and put it out into the...
So this is a project I don't know, it's called Inktober, 1 drawing per day.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Is there, who chooses the theme?
It's an artist who kind of is getting this movement going, but there is no theme. It's just challenging people to draw, and I think the more, like, the coloring phenomenon and the
yes.
kind of sketching, and it ties in with Beck's presentation from the first session. It's like getting people to express themselves and then put it out there for everyone to enjoy, kind of thing.
Yes, so the teen program of getting into this, I like the idea of getting into sort of the coloring book and this idea of the joy of creating together. I know I haven't joined it, but my city has, someone had a Facebook group where all they do is they meet up in pubs once a month and they just sit there and doodle. It's like the sort of the introvert's guide to going out, and like so everyone sits at their own table and they huddle over their drawings and maybe they share them, I don't know. But I love that idea. So I think a library would be maybe more conducive than a pub.
For the teens at least.
For the teens at least, yes. Yes?
I'm an academic librarian, and something that you didn't mention in your talk was textbooks, or maybe I missed it. But at my school, we're trying to encourage faculty to ditch their textbooks and embrace OER resources. And one of the things we're doing is offering, through our organizational learning, mini grant opportunities for faculty members to actually make money by developing their own content and then using a CC license, and then we can distribute it freely and they can adapt it. We can copy it for students in the library, but it seems like such a hard road, like to convince faculty members to leave behind their textbooks just because the students can't afford them. It seems so like easy, but it's actually really very difficult. And I didn't know if you could speak to that. And additionally, like another layer is what's interesting is if we embrace these open access resources. I'm the digital services librarian, so we put so much money into ebooks. That's really, there's a tension there too. Like what I would hope for is that we could just get rid of buying ebooks from publishers and just completely move to like open access materials. But again, I don't know that that's going to happen, or it's hard. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
No. Okay. So I think there's a sort of a two-themed question. One was where do open access textbooks come into play, and then the second one is how can academic libraries work while we're constrained by very sort of tight budgets and ebooks, whereas the production of OA resources does take money. Like these are not open access and Creative Commons work is free to the reader, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it does not mean it is not free to produce. And those costs have to be accommodated elsewhere. I think that so I know a little bit about the sort of open access textbook movement, and I think it's I think there's a couple of things that that I see momentum going forward, and I see a couple of things that are sort of restricting it. So in terms of momentum, I think students are becoming more vocal about this idea that their debt burdens are absurd. Yeah, we all know this. So the best way, I think of it as almost like a sort of social justice way. The best thing we can do to help our students is to reduce their debt load, and the best way for doing that is to heavily invest in open access textbooks, especially first-year textbooks where we're reinventing the wheel. So much of it will be a critical mass in the university in Canada, British Columbia has done a remarkable work with the textbook, building on textbooks. And so I think what happens once you get a critical mass of acceptable material, I think the restriction is that faculty will sometimes say, oh, but it's a quality thing, I need a quality thing. And the joy of an open access textbook is like, listen, if you like this really great chapter here and you don't like this other chapter, you can mix and match. Once you get 2 or 3. My favorite open access textbook story was there were 2 professors, 2 mathematics professors. They taught the same class, they just taught separate sections. One used an open access textbook, it was free, or it was something like $20. The other one used one that was like $150. All the students took the one class. That's what will drive it. So as librarians, as long as we recognize that all the work, editorial work, graphic work, all that sort of stuff, as you can know, it takes a lot of effort when we can do that, but I think it is really crucially important. But how we can transfer the money from access to production is really the challenge of our institution right now as the academic library. That's what we're all sort of trying to figure out, how we can make that without having our faculty come after us with pitchforks. Keeping the Halloween theme. Yes?
I was just going to throw out there that in December, I'm from Chicago Public Library,
Mm-hmm.
and in December we're doing Shishiboraimo.
Shishiboraimo.
So it's for children, so Chicago Children's Book Writing.
That's excellent. So Chicago Children's Book Writing Month. That is amazing. So I think that's really great because so there's 2 things what I think of when I think of writing programs through libraries. And one of them is that there was a game that was designed by Jane McGonigal for the New York Public Library. And it was this idea that, you go into the library and you're there to make history. And when we think of making history, what are people's dreams? So many people have a dream of writing a book, of being remembered, or just having something. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be famous, right? If you can write a book that you can pass down to, your grandchildren or your sister's children, or you have some sort of, you're there, you have a sort of tangible thing that you've passed on, that you've made with love. It doesn't have to necessarily be, a bestseller. Just the ability to have written a book, it's like it's like an intellectual marathon. Just by doing it is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And I think the more that libraries sort of tap into people's aspirations, once you tap into their aspirations and you're on their side and you shepherd them, the sort of response that you would get from your readership, your community, I think is just huge. And so it's the same thing about with kids. It's one thing to learn how to write. It's another thing to say, I've got a book, I can show you this book, look at, and have them bring that home and share it with other people. And I mean, Chicago does amazing work with the U Media Lab and all sorts of the Cities of Learning project. If you're involved with that, I'd love to know a little bit. If you know a little bit about it, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, we have someone very involved in media.
Oh, excellent. Yay! Okay, wonderful, thank you. I don't want to take anyone's break time, but I just want to...
Well, so thank you very much.